I started painting at the age of 14 in high school, and I remember one day riding along my a bicycle, and I passed by a chap that was painting on the side of the road, and so I was somewhat fascinated by this, and stopped and had a chat to him, and sort of inspired me to sort of at that stage paint in the outdoors. Growing up in the coastal town of Port Lincoln, I realised as I got a little bit older what influence this actually had on my art. And one of those influences was the sense of rhythm and movement in the landscape. And it wasn't until some years later, while I was painting, and one ponders on, you know, where your sense of composition and that kind of thing stems from. I realise it's stemming from where I grew up. So a great sense, a great love of blues and this of using blues and hues of blue and light. Our South Australian light is quite exceptional, different from anywhere else, and so I've actually I use this quite passionately in my art. But never quite capture it because it's a complex thing. So I spend a lot of time painting it outdoors in nature, and still today this is one of my passions. But when I come back to the studio, these works are the knowledge that I gained from doing these works and the sense of nature that sort of enters into my world, then becomes part of my larger, perhaps more serious works. Looking at my work, there's symbols such as crosses. I use the green cross, sometimes I've used a red cross. A green cross to symbolise nature, or looking after nature, as opposed to the red cross for saving people's lives and looking after people. The factory life and industry is a compelling component. Though I live in a country town, every time I go to the city, it's one thing that I guess stands out is the perhaps the pollution and what's going into our atmosphere. When I watch the news, it's the very thing that I'm made aware of, and I think it's actually, well, I know it is. It's actually quite uh, there's an opportunity to make, if possible, powerful statements about our environment and particularly our atmosphere, because without fresh air, and none of us can survive. The other part of my work is very much involved with um, the church and symbols. Again, using the crosses and chalices and sort of more religious iconic symbols. And somewhere throughout the work, these elements all can sometimes come into play. Um, Music has a huge influence on the sort of work I do and the rhythm within the work. Sometimes I've painted pictures purely by from a piece of Tchaikovsky or some Yota Yindi or whatever, and allowed that to inspire me, because the imagery that comes out is sometimes somewhat primitive, and as I look back on them, I wonder where the hell they came from. But it's very subconscious on that level. I think, well, I don't think I know that I try and make people aware of, in some cases, an environment that isn't being polluted by mankind. Yeah. Thing is, when you looked at the work of many artists quite passionately over the years, you realise that, that each individual possesses and creates their own style in time. For myself, I actually I don't think I have a style, although there is an underlying sense of tone and rhythm and sort of elements that, how do I say, compose. That I'm very conscious of composition and the power of composition and the power of imagery. I don't know whether that's a style. People say that they can recognise my work, but it might be easier for them to recognise it than for myself. So, and I've never been into style or design, but if my work was to be categorised, it's probably would become fit into the realm of environmental art, I'd imagine. Alright, this painting, titled About Time, came as a reaction to a lot of discussion on wind turbines and generally our public not wanting the turbines in their domain because of noise and electromagnetic sort of fields and that kind of thing. But of course in the right place it's possibly one way of helping to resolve our carbon issues. So in this case, I thought what better place to place these turbines than an esplanade, because everyone loves their view, and I thought, well, I'll actually place them along this esplanade and considering the fact that we've all grown up with what we call Stobie poles, sort of out in front of our house, and everywhere we go, and we don't see them because we've become accustomed to them. So I thought I'd actually, if these things were placed in such a situation, perhaps in time they might help solve some of our issues, and they may not be a problem. It's only hypothetically, of course. But so, having titled it About Time, I thought I'd sort of go back some 5,000 years in time to the pyramids and sort of work my way through the sort of centuries back into a very modern sort of environment where we have solar panels and no vehicles in this case. But everyone has gone, all these characters have all gone out to watch the sailing boats and ponder on time or existence. So it's quite a complex painting. It was actually inspired from a trip to Melbourne. Sort of when you actually go into the main sort of area of Melbourne, down alongside of the Yarra, and you actually walk through and down and so on. So I'd sort of come back and paint it as a result of that. Again, I've used, in this situation, I use a green cross in here to represent people who perhaps stand up for the environment, and yeah, so it was quite an exciting painting to produce at the time. This painting painted back quite currently in 2008, I titled In Awe as in Awe territory. So it's was stemmed back when the mining boom was sort of taking off. Thus I've sort of painted this all in reds and in the colour of mainly iron, or something like that. And so pure creation. In this case I have like the smelters and things from the mining company became actually quite tiny in this one, and the landscape has taken over. A lot of people ask why I've put this symbol through here, and I thought after I'd nearly finished this painting, I thought, well, it's just another painting and it hasn't got a meaning behind it. So thus I decided to add this element of of a symbol, and it's not a cross as such. It's actually just purely symbolic to represent spirituality within the landscape of no particular sort of, I guess, what do you call it, of religion. It's spiritual landscape. So I put in there. A lot of people say they'd enjoy it without that, but I enjoy it with that, so it stays there. Alright, this painting, the title called Passing Shad, was painted a few years ago when the River Murray was in drought, and so thus I've just painted. The passing shad bit is that very often in the drought the clouds sort of form and nothing happens. So I've got this huge cloud that's sort of disappearing, but intermingled with that cloud is you know, a little bit of energy rising out of industry stack here, and just adding to the comment that perhaps changing our environment through carbon is actually altering our environment. So in here, this river, or perhaps ravine or eroded area, which might have once had water, is bone dry. So yeah. There's brilliant artists. Australia produces, I think, a lot of brilliant artists, and I think art in general. Well, if you don't have, well, for myself, if you don't have a point of view on something to say, it's pretty hard to be inspired, because I mean, today there's so much what I call designer art that's just about mark making and making things look pretty on people's walls, filling a space. But I don't think these works will live on. So I myself would rather be an individual and speak my own mind on my canvas. There is room for art today for myself. Artists think outside of the square and see things so differently from a lot of people, and present their both sculpture and imagery in new ways. And I think that's what artists have always done and will always continue to do.